That's her. That is her. Dude, Mike, it's a humongous tiger. Oh my God, dude.
Yeah, we got her. Oh my gosh. We got her. Holy cow. The Gadorsey hog. Dude!
Welcome to the Musky Therapy Podcast. Please follow me this way. The doctor is ready to see you now. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode on the Musky Therapy Podcast. And guys, gals, tonight I have a very special guest on the show, Jordan Weeks. Welcome to Musky Therapy. Thanks so much for being with us here tonight.
Thanks, Chaz. I'm happy to be here.
We are here to talk muskies, and Jordan, your name. I mean, you are known as the Musky Whisperer. I mean, you've got a number of nicknames and accolades kind of following your name. But for those of you who are listening that don't know Jordan, if you wouldn't mind maybe introducing yourself to the folks that maybe aren't familiar with your work within musky biology and muskellunge management in the state of Wisconsin and elsewhere. I mean, maybe tell people about your education, what you've done. You're obviously a 20-plus year veteran, with these various roles. So maybe we can kind of kick things off with that.
Sure, absolutely. We won't go over all the nicknames my buddy's talking about. Those probably aren't appropriate. But yeah, I started out working for Wisconsin DNR when I was an undergrad at UWSP. I'm going to date myself. Everybody's going to know that I'm an old guy now, but I guess you can't get 25 years in anything without being old.
No. It
so
catches up.
I was working at a state park in Cornell, Wisconsin during my undergrad at UW in Stevens Point. Worked there every summer as a park ranger, kind of all around laborer. And I knew when I went to Stevens Point as an undergrad what I wanted to do. I knew long before I got to high school. I knew it when I was a high schooler, probably as a sophomore. It's always been the thing that's been driving me. I always wanted to make fishing better. And what really kind of wraps that up is I grew up in a little town south of Madison called Stoughton, and there was some really good fishing around there, but it was mostly in the Yahara chain, Lake Kegonsa, Mud Lake, things like that. And I would always go bass fishing in Mud Lake, and I had never understood why you couldn't go catch and release fishing for bass, like outside the closed season. It was one of the things as a kid, I always wondered why that was. And I went so far as to even call the DNR to get an answer as like a youth. And they told me, well, it's just how it is. That's the rules. We don't want you out there fishing, And so that was kind of the beginning of my curiosity into, being one of these folks that tried to make fishing better. And so through that, going to UWSP as a undergrad, and then as soon as I graduated there in 1999, I graduated with a double major in fisheries and biology. I started working at Escanaba Lake Fisheries Research Station, which is up by Boulder Junction.
Yeah.
Worked there for 2 summers. In the winter in between, I was a creel clerk over by Hayward. So I sat on a frozen lake and talked to, theoretically, I talked to a lot of anglers. The lake I was on, anglers like to come out at 4 p.m. and they'd fish till, 8, 9 at night. And the creel schedule ended at 5 p.m. So I never got to talk to these guys. I actually did talk to one guy when I got there in the morning at 7 a.m. when he was coming off the lake. He'd been out there all night. There was the only guy I talked to all winter. So that was kind of boring. But then I started also working for fish management in Woodruff, right near the hatchery there. I wasn't working at the hatchery, but I was working with fish management, both in their treaty unit, which deals with all the tribal issues, and then also with their management, which does the rest of the stuff. So I did that for about 5 years. Then went back to Stevens Point, got my master's. That was in 2005. My master's work was probably one of the best projects ever, especially as a person who loves the musky fish.
And you're fairly well known for this, what you're about to tell us, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. It was really cool. It was the project was designed to work on walleyes, and myself and my grad professor kind of started asking questions on, well, can we get double duty on this? Can we do walleyes and muskies? And kind of ask the same questions to see if our current management at the time was appropriate, or if there were reasons to change management. So to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version without going too long here, essentially lakes are all managed individually in Wisconsin. So even if they're part of the chain, like the Three Lakes chain or the Eagle River chain, each individual lake has its own quotas for spearing or stocking or population estimation or anything you want to do. They all manage them separately. And my project was aimed to find out if that was the appropriate way to do it when it comes to walleyes and muskies, or if there was a different way. And essentially, I corroborated the proper management or the management that was going on, because what I found is walleyes generally didn't leave the lake that they spawned in during the course of their life. Like about 10% would wander around. And so that meant the management on those systems was appropriate, because they generally didn't leave. So we can consider those populations generally closed. And as far as muskies went, they were much more mobile. About almost 50% of them spawned in one lake and then spent their summer in the rest of the lake, or at least another part of the season in the rest of the lakes. And so that didn't really change management, though, because, I mean, as far as harvest goes for muskies, it was a bag of one.
Yes,
so it doesn't really change the way muskie management went. But it did kind of give us some clues into home range size, movement, when fish moved a lot, when they didn't, where they spawned, and if they spawn in the same place every year, and things like that. So it was like it was one of the coolest. I had 36 muskies radio tagged for that research. And at the time, as far as I can tell, that was the largest number of muskies ever radio tagged in any research study.
Wow.
Now there's been more than that in other studies, but at the time in the early 2000s, that was like the highest number of radio tag fish in any research project that was going.
And this was correct me if I'm wrong, but this was in Manitowish, correct?
Yep, the Manitowish chain. Yep, cool. 10-lake chain, about 4,000 acres of water.
And
sounds like a big place, but 4,000 acres really isn't that much.
I have to ask, because I find this fascinating, but this is how it goes with these conversations. But walleyes, you're telling me again, but those bag limits on individual lakes, that still holds as I guess useful data as far as bag limits. That's interesting. So they actually don't.
Yeah, it was nice, because as a scientist, when you do an experiment, right, you have a hypothesis, and then you try to disprove your hypothesis, basically. And our hypothesis was, we don't think they move, and that's what we found out with walleyes.
That's very interesting.
We actually disproved it with muskies, but it didn't change the management because it's a one bag, right? So
anyway, I didn't mean to knock you off discussing your work, but so this was your work post graduate, or this was in your thesis work?
Yep, that's my graduate thesis. So I completed my research there and wrote a thesis. It's in the library at UWSP, and then I actually published a paper on that same research for the North American Journal of Fisheries Management with my graduate professor. So I published that research, and not a lot of anglers know this, but like that's the pinnacle of doing research, is actually doing it and then publishing it and getting it accepted into a peer-reviewed journal. So that's when it becomes like factual.
Yes.
So there's lots of reports out there and studies that are done that don't get to that point. And I'm not saying they're worthless. They can be very valuable, but they don't have the same amount of scrutiny that a peer-reviewed study would have.
Absolutely.
So yeah, from there, I was actually not even completed. I didn't have they call it a thesis defense at the very end. Is where your professors get in a room with you and make you feel really stupid. They did that. They were successful. I actually got hired full time by the DNR in La Crosse before I defended my thesis. So it was about a month before I got hired as the inland trout biologist in La Crosse, covering 4 counties down there, starting in 2005. Interesting.
So you were inland trout to kick things off.
Yep. Yeah, I worked on trout. And actually, I don't talk about this very much, so this is pretty cool. But so 4 counties: La Crosse, Monroe, Vernon, and Crawford counties. It's called the driftless area. It's the best trout fish in Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can walk across trout on these streams. They're freaking loaded with trout, and unbelievable numbers of trout. And during that time, starting in 2006, I actually worked with a lake association. There was one reservoir. Well, there's like 5 of them in that management area, 5 reservoirs. One of them's sort of big. It's about 700 acres. And we actually started stocking muskies in it. It was called Lake Neshonoc. We had to do an environmental assessment because it never had muskies in it before. So I wrote that. there were documents like way back in the 50s that there may have been muskies in the La Crosse River, or at least in the Mississippi around La Crosse. And so that was part of the justification for doing that. But the Lake Association was on board and the locals were on board. So we started stocking muskies there in 2006. And some of the first muskies, we stocked some fall fingerlings, those 11 to 12 inchers. And then we also got about 100 adults from Butternut Lake in Price County.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, Butternut was really high density. And Skip Sommerfeld, the biologist, wanted to reduce the density to try to grow some bigger fish. And we could move fish around at that time. It was pre-VHS. So just basically a year before VHS showed up. So we were able to move fish. And I drove up with a couple hatchery trucks and we loaded these adult muskies on the truck. They were from like 22 inches up to 40 inches. And brought them down to La Crosse. They all had pit tags in them. We let them go in the lake and then stocked that lake for about 10 years. And we had an okay fishery. The lake is really interesting. Its average depth is 4 feet. It's really turbid. It has a huge bed load, like a lot of silt that comes down downstream. So it's not clear at all. Hardly any vegetation and very little structure. It's the hardest lake to fish in the world because there's nothing to hold the fish, right?
You just essentially fish in bait clouds or, bait pods?
Yeah, Or a stump you could find, or there's a few cribs in there, and there's a few dredge cuts, which were okay for fishing. But it was really a very difficult place to fish. But after we started stocking for about 5-6 years, some of the local guys caught a few. My wife caught some. I caught a few. Not very many, like a handful. But what we found out is they really like to go over the dam.
Oh.
And this dam is like sieve of all sieves. It didn't hold anything in really. And eventually almost all the fish left downstream. And so after about 10 years of stocking, we weren't meeting the management goals. And then also on top of that, we ran into some budgeting issues. So we had to cut stocking in that system. Not that like the local muskie club could have stocked it, but they didn't like fishing there anyways. So, cause it was hard to fish.
Yeah.
And
the fish are leaving.
So I don't blame them for not wanting to put money into it. But it was kind of cool while it lasted. And there are still a few fish, in the system, but they're far and few between.
That is cool, man. Wow.
Yeah. So I worked as an inland biologist until 2016. And I should back up a little bit. In 2005, when I got hired full-time with the department, I started leading the statewide muskie team. And I think there's some confusion among anglers and maybe people in general about like DNR structure and how we're organized. Because a lot of people thought as a leader of the muskie team, like that's all I did. But that was just one part of what I did. So I was doing all this trout work for the most part. And then on the side, I was leading a team of biologists that was in the state working on muskie issues. So I was leader of that team from 05 till 23.
Wow.
And in 23, some of our leadership was like talking about getting other people experience leading this team. And so I stepped aside at that time to allow some other folks to, get experience leading the team, to kind of take it in a direction that they wanted to take it. It's the exact same thing that my colleague Tim Simonson did for me when I took over the team. So he was the leader for a long time, and I took over, and he was still involved, just like I'm still involved with the muskie team now.
Absolutely.
So it's a really cool deal. And the scientists, the biologists that are on this team vary from time to time. It doesn't change a lot, but we kind of answer to our policy team, which is Fish Chief Justine Haas, and she leads the policy team. And then there are some district supervisor level people, and then there's team supervisors, and then biologists, right? So these biologists are kind of, and the muskie team goes right to the policy team with their ideas, and then the policy team either rejects them or accepts them, and so forth. And so this whole time I was inland biologist, I was also muskie team leader. And then in 2016, I promoted to fisheries supervisor. So now I'm, instead of hands in the water, squeezing fish all the time, I was managing a team of scientists. And this particular position was on the Mississippi River. So I manage all all 234 miles of Wisconsin's west coast right now. We actually have some great beaches, by the way. If you haven't been on the Mississippi, our beaches are fantastic. But yeah, so I've been doing that since 2016. Considering potentially a little bit change of scenery right now, but we'll see what happens with that. Not that I'm leaving the department. I just might consider a different role. But I love the Mississippi. I love my team, and I still am on the Muskie team, still involved with all that stuff. And like you said, I've done all kinds of podcasts, and I wrote for Muskie Hunter magazine from 2006 to 2023, basically the same time I was Muskie team leader. Written articles for other outlets, met with the Muskie Clubs Alliance and various Muskies Inc. clubs, spoke at, Muskie Expos multiple times. So I've done a lot of different things with that. And it's really my true passion. It's Muskies I don't really care about the other fish.
Not even the trout.
I say that joking.
Yeah.
Sort of joking. Not really, though. But anybody who works with me, they all know that muskies are really the thing that I care about. And, they're also the thing that I pursue. I hardly ever fish for anything else. When I have time to go fishing, pretty much the only thing I fish for is muskies. Mm-hmm. So that kind of brings us to where we're at right now.
Well, so Jordan, again, I mean, that just, with your bio and experience, you are like the perfect guy to talk to about some of the, I guess I'm going to call them maybe historical changes and some recent decisions that have happened in Wisconsin here, and it's caused a lot of, at least for me, you and I are somewhat in the same social media world. We see a lot of we'll call common names in the muskie industry discussing some of these changes. So I'm going to go ahead, if you don't mind, and ask kind of the first question. Sure. We'll lead right into it. And this is interesting, right? Because Wisconsin has, and correct me anytime here if I say anything that's maybe I misquote something here, but
sure.
As far as I understand, from my perspective, Wisconsin has kind of maintained this split muskie opener between the northern and the southern zone since sometime. I'm curious to hear, when exactly, maybe, but since like the 1980s. And from a management perspective, like, what shifts prompted the department to move in like this unified statewide opener starting here in 2026? This is like a pretty historical change, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, there is definitely some concern from anglers I've heard, and I'm sure you're aware of as well. But the season structure actually was created in 1984. Excuse me, I almost said 94. 1984. And it was part of a 1979 DNR Muskie management plan. So we write management plans periodically. Ideally, you'd like to have them about every 10 years. That's not all the time what happens because there are lengthy documents. But this particular muskie management plan from 1979, that one of their goals was to evaluate the effectiveness of various regulations to limit harvest. Because at that time, and that was like the first 84, I would have been about 8, and I wasn't muskie fishing at the time, so I had no idea what was going on. But at the time, muskies, when they were caught, they were harvested.
This was the old catch and kill days, right? I mean, this is
I'm not sure if they were still shooting them at that time with pistols or not, but either way, muskies and all fish really, there wasn't such a thing as catch and release. It wasn't a thing. So people went fishing for food, and many people needed it for sustenance. So all the species we had and all the species that the department was working on at the time had to be, thought of in that light, right? And that hasn't changed till this day. Like the biggest thing that we have to worry about is harvest or exploitation, right?
Yes.
That's the number one thing we have to be concerned about. It's not a lot of other things. That's the most important one, right? So in 1984, they decided in order to reduce harvest, which they estimated at the time to be greater than like 65,000 muskies annually.
Wow.
That sounds like it's a big number. But and I'm not sure at the time how many classified muskie lakes we had. That's one of the pieces of information I haven't gone back and looked into. But right now we have, somewhere around 700-ish, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, that's a pretty good number per water body if you divided it out equally. So that was the primary reason that the season was put into place. So we had a closed season. They wanted to close it early in the year to reduce the amount of time that anglers had to harvest fish. In looking at how we got to the point we were at today, people on the Musky team, myself included, Tim Simonson, myself, a lot of the other folks in the Musky team, looked at some of this research and looked at these reports to try to figure out where we were and why we put that in place in the first place. And literally,
that's very
the
interesting.
Verbiage,
yeah.
The verbiage said we want to reduce harvest. We want to limit harvest. So shorter seasons, higher size limits, restrictions of angling methods, changing bag limits were all necessary as part of this objective. So at the same time, they put a minimum length limit on. They went from 30 to 32 inches, which at the time was probably, everybody was probably up in arms about that too at the time. Right. They didn't mention spawning fish, but they also mentioned in that order protection of spawning habitat. And if people take nothing away from this podcast, they need to know that habitat degradation is the number one reason why we have to stock fish in the state of Wisconsin.
I very much believe that.
Number one reason.
And this would be interesting to bring up wake boats later on, because I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Because that does kind of start to tie into this in some way.
It's all tied together, Chaz. Everything that happens on the water or in the water or around the water is all tied together. But you know that.
Yeah, but so this is but by shortening the season by 3 weeks, they're saying, and then they increased the harvest length by 2 inches. That was the general idea to reduce harvest in 84.
Right. Yep.
It doesn't seem like that would be like that substantial of a change to massively reduce the 65,000. You said 65,000 muskies per year?
Yeah, that's what it was estimate, right?
That was the estimate. Okay.
And I'm not sure exactly how they estimated that. And I got to ask that question, and I'm still looking into trying to find out how they estimated that number. It sounds like a really high number to me, but, without knowing exactly how they estimated it, I imagine it was through creel surveys, which is what we do now.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't been able to actually track down, the document that shows that. So it does say it in this management report, though, right? So somebody did something somewhere. I just haven't gotten to find it yet.
Interesting.
But imagine trying to find something from 1979 or whatever.
So that was 84, and this kind of has been in place all the way, obviously, through 2025. And so what happens? What prompts the department to look at, what kind of data are you guys looking at where you say, we should really, unify with the southern zone and have just the harvest opener be May 2nd? Like, what kind of leads the Wisconsin DNR toward that decision?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of ways we can get to the different various changes or answers to questions like that. Each one is a little bit unique. So I think I'd be remiss if I skipped over the Wisconsin Conservation Congress and DNR spring hearings.
I'm curious to I'm really excited to have you just kind of guide us. You are the expert, honestly. So I'm I have these the big picture question, but I'm very curious to hear, guide me through what we need to know to kind of understand this decision.
Sure, I'll absolutely get there, but you need to bear with me a little bit on the behind the scenes details. So there's a number of ways that rules can change in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay.
Like fishing rules, let's just say. Mm-hmm. So one way is a DNR person has a rule that they want to put into place. They must have some data that shows that the change would be appropriate. Then they hold public meetings with their local folks to see if they can get buy-in. They get buy-in there, then they go to their supervisor and say, look, I got this idea. Here's my data. I got buy-in from the locals. Supervisor says, okay, that meets the requirements for considering a change. Then they put that forward from the DNR side of things. So that rule can then go to the DNR spring hearings, basically after going through some internal ground truthing, okay? So there's two parts to the spring hearings every year in Wisconsin. And before I get too far into that, Wisconsin's the only state that allows their angling and hunting public to give feedback this way. We're unique in that matter. And I think it's a really great thing for the citizens of Wisconsin because they're able to voice their opinions on things. In the example I just laid out, they would be able to give their opinion on those local meetings, right? It wouldn't be on a statewide level at that point, but it would be locally about the water body that they're trying to change the rule on. Okay. So they take that, it goes to the DNR spring hearings. And back in the day, our process was rather a lot quicker than it is now. Now it takes about 4 years to get a rule in place. Before it was about 2. It's still a really long time. Anyways, so if the rule goes through the DNR process, it gets put on the spring hearings, and then it gets voted on, right? It's the second Monday in May second Monday in April every year. There's a meeting held in every county of the state. Now it's nicer because it's online, so you don't have to go anywhere. But before you used to have to go and raise your hand, and you had to fill in a little scan sheet or whatever. There was all kinds of different stuff that happened, but over time it's changed. So now there's a in-person option now currently, and then also an online option. But that would give everyone in the state a crack at that particular rule. So that was one way. The other way it can come is either from the Conservation Congress, or it can come from any member of the public. And those two processes are kind of linked in that if it's the Conservation Congress, if folks aren't aware, it's folks that generally are hunters and fishers from each county that get elected to seats. There's usually 4 or maybe 5 per county. That's actually something I don't know for sure, but it's something like that. They get elected to these seats, and then they have elections every couple of years to see if anyone else wants to get on these Wisconsin Conservation Congress boards. And then as part of that, there's larger committees like Warmwater. There's Mississippi River Committee. There's Great Lakes Committee. There's the Trout Committee. So of all the representatives across the state of Wisconsin, they break them up into smaller committees that deal with issues regarding those committees. So the Trout Committee deals with trout questions, right? So this Wisconsin Conservation Congress Committee can have their own ideas about changes to things, and they can put those forward. They go on the same spring hearings, but they go on the Conservation Congress side. If they pass the Conservation Congress side and the department is interested in that change, then we can take their results, should it pass, and then we can move it forward on the DNR side, and then it would become a law. So it would have to pass on the Conservation Congress side. DNR would have to take the question, either put it forward verbatim or make some changes to it based on data and research, and then we'd ask the question again on the DNR side, and once it passes there, then it would go into effect.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's really 2 main veins in which change can be taking place.
No, there's another one.
Okay.
So there's at least one more. So the third way it could be done is through the Conservation Congress, but it's called a citizen resolution. And that's where this season change for muskies came from. So the way that works is any citizen, there's kind of an outline on how to do this. And you can go online and read it. If you go to Wisconsin Conservation Congress, there's like how to write a resolution. So there's directions on how to do it. But essentially, you have to put a resolution in, and it has to meet a certain criteria. So anyone with an idea about any fishing or hunting rule could do this at any hearing. You just have to write the resolution and follow the directions. I think you have to submit them a little bit before the hearing now. You used to be able to just show up to a hearing because they were all in person, and you could just provide them there. But now with the online, we have to have, I think there's a time period where you have to have it into our contact so that it can be published. So anyway, it's a little bit different, but it could be any idea. And so this idea of a season change actually came from that citizen resolution process. It was asked as a citizen resolution in Oneida and Vilas County in 2019. It passed in both of those counties.
Interesting.
Then in 2020, they asked it again.
Interesting.
Because
I'm just trying to.
When a citizen resolution goes through, the Wisconsin Conservation Congress doesn't have to take it up. even if it passes, they don't have to do anything with it, nor does the department. And at that time, the department didn't take a position on it. We acknowledged that it went through. We wanted to see more feedback to determine if it was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we waited. We didn't do anything. It passed again the next year. So the same people introduced these resolutions in the same counties again. They passed again. And so when that happened, then the Conservation Congress Warm Water Committee took it under advisement. And during that part, the department didn't really do anything. We didn't do anything with it until 2021 when we were asked by the Warm Water Committee to look into it. So that's when we started our due diligence to look at the research, to go back to find out why the rule was put in place in the first place, to see if there were any examples of situations like this, and kind of do a whole literature search is what we call it. So we started to do that in 2021. I was leading that as part of the Musky team, looking into a lot of this different things. Tim Simonson was always also instrumental in looking into this stuff. And then we did decide to advance an advisory question in 2021.
Now, what does that mean?
The only thing that we changed was the original question had a catch and release component in May.
Oh,
so
okay, yeah.
The 3 weeks would have been catch and release only. But the reason that a Musky team didn't include that was twofold. Number one, current muskie harvest is almost zero statewide. Very few muskies get kept by anglers. Not to say that some definitely do. We estimate about 200 or so a year get harvested. That's drastically less than 65,000.
So, yeah, exactly.
Right. So that's, if you think about 200 muskies over 700 muskie lakes,
that's not much. Yeah.
It's not very much. It's not much different than what, natural mortality would be.
Mm-hmm.
So, we decided to remove that catch and release for that reason. And also we're always being asked by the legislature to make our rules more simple. And when you talk to anglers, they can't read the regulations, or they don't want to, or they don't understand them. And I do understand, because there are some, please don't look at the border water regulations, because they are very difficult to understand.
That was in one of my questions. Maybe we'll save that for another night.
Yeah. So the second part is always trying to simplify regulations, right? Which is kind of an oxymoron when it comes to fisheries management, because ideally the best way to manage an individual water is just that way. It's individually. Putting blanket management strategies across a whole bunch of different lakes is the easiest for people to understand, but it's not the best way to manage all these systems, because each one of them is unique. But so that's a lot of extra information.
It's really appreciated, because this is what I have wanted, and I assume a lot of my friends and a lot of the listeners want this in-depth experience with you. This is why we're lucky to have you on. But again, I keep coming back to this. Okay, so you guys now are in this place where, and you've done research on this for 4 years, right? From 2021, and then now obviously we're rolling into the 2026 season. So you guys have been digging through research and doing your own research for a while, and I guess that's maybe, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm so excited to hear kind of like where have you guys gone in the last 4 years since you really started picking away at this?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, your 4 years is about right. It's just the years are a little bit, maybe I didn't tell you appropriately. So when the first time this citizen resolution was asked, I personally started looking into it.
Oh, right? So back in 19.
Yeah, so 19, I started looking into it, but I was just out of curiosity, right? Because I'm always curious to learn about muskies.
Since you were a kid. Okay.
I'm constantly reading, published research. As soon as a new paper comes out, I'm reading it. But anyway, I digress. So then that Wisconsin Conservation Congress advisory question was in 2020. That passed 24,000 votes to 9,000 votes. So and all 72 counties were in favor of it. And then 2021, when we asked it, we reviewed a proposal for the advisory question. So we didn't put a question in 2021, which I think I misspoke before and said that we did. The DNR advisory question was in 2022. So
Okay.
we asked the question about moving and the question at that time was included border waters, and it was a statewide question. So we wanted to move it to the first Saturday in May to be uniform opener, and then we got rid of that catch and release component, and we included the boundary waters. That question passed 10,000 votes to 3,000 votes.
Wow.
All 72 counties voted in favor. And I'm generalizing these numbers.
Yeah, but it's good to get the idea. Yeah.
But yeah. So so what happens, we typically ask an advisory question the year before the binding question goes into effect. And fish questions for spring hearings, if you're interested in fish questions, they're always binding on odd years. Just FYI. That's how the process works.
Interesting. Okay.
We ask advisory questions on even years. So this year, in a few weeks, we will be asking a few questions. I don't think there are any musky questions this year. But we're going to be asking advisory questions in 2026. If they pass in 2026, you will see them again in 2027, and they'll be considered a binding question. Right? Cool. So if the vote goes in favor in 2027, then those things would go into effect hopefully in 2028. And that's where this particular situation gets a little bit wonky. So we did ask that question in 2023, and we changed it a little bit after the question for a couple of reasons, and I'll get to that. So in 2023, we asked the question again, and we had a lot fewer people voting overall in the state, but it still passed 4,000 votes to 1,300 votes. And all 72 counties were in favor. After it passed in 2023, the traditional way that it would go in would be it would go to the Natural Resource Board and then become a rule in 2024. There was a lot of concern for the rule, even though it passed all these times and we had all this background information that we had compiled. There was still a lot of concerns about the border waters for a couple of reasons. First, Green Bay is a rehabilitation project, right? That those fish were extirpated from Green Bay through commercial fishing. And we didn't want to necessarily include them in the first place. But for clarity, we did, or for statewide proposal, we did. But after these concerns came up, we said, you know what, let's not include the border waters for that reason. And also because we couldn't get Michigan to go along with any changes. And that's the reason that the regs are still screwed up on the Menominee River right now. Because we can't get Michigan. I mean, Michigan's got a year-round catch and release season.
Yes.
So if I kind of blame Michigan, I probably really shouldn't, because part of it is us not being willing to match what Michigan has to make it more simple. But that's a whole can of worms that I'm not really. There's not a lot of data on that particular situation. I can just tell you that that's how it is.
Yeah.
We are looking to hopefully remedy that in the future, but a lot of things have to happen to get uniform regulations on the Menominee River. That's neither here nor there. As part of this, though, we also had a number of folks that were concerned. They went to the Natural Resource Board meeting, expressed their concern. However, there was some shenanigans in the Conservation Congress. We had a couple people say some things that weren't really part of the process and convinced some folks on the Conservation Congress that things were a certain way when they weren't. So then at that time, Tim Simonson, myself, Justine Haas met with Conservation Congress leadership, laid out what are all the data that we had that would support this change, all the information that we currently have. And then once they heard that, they're like, well, that's not what we were told. Yes, we have less concern now. Go ahead. Well, by the time that all happened, the rule changing time with the legislature had already passed, so we had to wait. And that's why it went into effect this year. It should have went in 2024. It took 2 extra years because of, I guess I'll call it shenanigans.
Interesting. Wow.
So it got put in to the legislative changes. I guess it's last year then to go into effect this year. And the biggest problem we have and I'll take some responsibility for this, even though I'm not technically responsible. But I'm happy to do that. We should have put out some more information. We should have put out some press releases prior to the fishing regulations coming out this year, so that folks weren't. They kind of felt blindsided, and I don't really blame them for that, because there wasn't a lot of communication, even though we had all this previous, communication.
Yes.
And everyone was aware of that stuff. The time period in between was too long, and they had kind of forgotten and thought it kind of went away. So we're working to remedy that right now. And in fact, I'm actually writing a document that kind of explains this whole process that will be coming out as I'm not sure if it'll be a social media post or a press release or what. But at some point coming up pretty soon here, well before the season actually opens, there'll be a document out there that folks can read, and they kind of will get the skinny on this whole thing.
Cool.
The number one thing when you talk about fish management is harvest, right? So, for example, when you're talking about walleyes, harvest is pretty obviously the number one issue, right? Yes. While there are some anglers that do catch and release walleyes, the majority of anglers in Wisconsin kill every legal walleye that they can.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's easier with muskies because at this point in history, it's a catch and release species, right? There may be a handful of old timers or even young timers that like to eat muskies. I would just say they're not really healthy to eat, so you probably shouldn't. But you do you. But generally, they're a catch and release species. So the first thing we looked at was harvest, right?
Okay.
The next thing we looked at was like how certain systems that have open seasons, how they operate. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Escanaba Lake doesn't have a closed season.
Yes.
It's been open since 1946. And that muskie population, which you may or may not know, it wasn't native to that lake. That lake was a bass panfish lake before muskies were stocked, I want to say in like 46 or 47.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so walleyes and muskies were stocked there. So, which is really interesting because it's really, now it's more of a bass lake than it was when I worked there in 1999. When I worked there, it was basically just walleyes, muskies, and perch. And you didn't hardly see anything else in that lake. A few pike, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. And hardly ever saw a bass. I saw my first bass in 1999 there. And wow. I'd been working, in 2000 when I was working there. And, the records in the data basically showed hardly any bass.
Okay.
So everything changes in all these lakes, but suffice it to say that this lake that was originally a bass panfish lake, walleyes and muskies got stocked, the habitat is pristine. I was going to say, yeah. Like I said before, the habitat is the key. So habitat there is pristine. There's no buildings on the lake other than just the research station, and that's not where anything spawns. And there's great rock spawning habitat for walleyes, and there's great other spawning habitat for muskies.
Yes.
And when I say other, muskie spawning habitat is a little bit ambiguous compared to some other species. Walleyes need to have like a gravel cobble, wind blown, typically on the southeast parts of lakes where the northwest wind hits it. Needs to be real oxygenated, a little tiny bit of clay in that soil so that the eggs harden. That's where the best walleye spawning habitat is. Muskies kind of spawn in various habitats in various systems. Some systems they spawn on sand outside of bulrushes. Some systems they spawn in rivers or creeks coming in. Some systems they spawn over softer bottom areas, but the key to those soft bottom areas is that there has to be something to hold the eggs up off the bottom. Mm-hmm. Because unlike northern pike, muskies' eggs are not adhesive. So northern pike eggs are, as soon as they're fertilized, they get real sticky. So anything they touch on the way to the bottom, they hang up on, and then they're oxygenated and they can hatch. But any egg that goes into like a muck bottom bay, any egg that hits that sediment is going to suffocate because there's no oxygen there.
Yeah.
Right. So if muskies are spawning in those areas and there's not a lot of there's not a lot of wood in those areas or submersed aquatic wood, the eggs will hit the bottom and they generally die. But if there's a lot of wood, the eggs can land on the wood and then they can survive. So muskies have a highly variable spawning locations in various systems. That's different than other species. So anyway, they've been naturally reproducing in Escanaba Lake since they were introduced, which, like I said, I think it's in
1946 or something.
Mid-40s.
Okay.
And that population is it's fluctuated over time, but that's not unusual for naturally reproducing muskie populations like Lake of the Woods or Leash Lake or places like that are, sustained solely through natural reproduction. Those populations kind of fluctuate through time. And, there's been a lot of research into what makes them have good year classes and bad year classes. Dr. Castleman in Canada has tried to link it to some of the El Nino events that we have.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's, there's a lot of different theories on when you get the best year classes, all of it linked to habitat. So that we looked at Escanaba, the population has been able to be, exploited forever. It still persists without any, negative impacts to that season. And it's not stocked at all. So we looked at that. Let's see, what else did we look at?
And when you say persist, can I ask a couple, persist, is that like similar, population, or you'd say similar numbers per fishable acre compared to like the state average or something like that? Or how does that kind of metric play out?
No, that's not necessarily how I meant it. I guess
Okay.
It could be interpreted that way, but I meant it persist is in the fact that it's been open. People have been allowed to fish for them during the entire year, including through the ice, and fishing for them has not made the population go away.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
So we're like, what's the efficacy of fishing for fish during the time in which they're spawning? Because like I said before, when I first started looking into this, I, much like many people, were under the impression that, it was to protect them during spawn.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Sure. And I understand that completely. The thing is we found out that that's not what it was, right? So then when you were presented with new information and you're able to pivot and then say, okay, well, wait a second. I thought this one thing, I'm presented with other information. Now I can change my mind, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what we did. So we looked at that. We looked at other examples of places like, I don't know if you're familiar with the James River in Virginia. That's a really kind of a unique, cool situation too. I've been involved in some research on hot water and angling with muskies with some scientists from Virginia and Coastal Carolina University and Maryland, West Virginia. Out there, we did a big project, and those guys were telling me about the James River, which is really cool. It was started out as a stock fishery, so they stock fish for a whole bunch of years there. Established a population. It's open all year. They found out that they don't catch anything in the hot summer because those fish are stressed and they won't bite. So basically, people quit fishing there in the hot part of the summer, July, August time. But they hammer the crap out of them the rest of the year. And the population was relatively high. Those fish it was a stock fishery. But then over time, they started noticing that those fish were reproducing. And so in conversations with some of those Virginia Department of Fish and Game folks, they're like, yeah, we stocked forever. We started to notice natural reproduction. So we stopped stocking, and now it's all natural reproduction. And they also have no closed season. So we're looking at that going, okay, granted, it's a river. It's still muskies. Okay, this is more reason that we can feel pretty good about this change. So we looked at that. We also looked at a study, a European study on pike. And this is something that some folks get fired up about, but this is super common in fisheries management, where you look at if there's no research on the particular species and the exact subject that you want to look at, you look at adjacent species or closely related species to see if there's any research there. So there is no study specifically to determine if angling for muskies during their spawn is a detriment to them. There's no research out there, no published research for sure. So we looked at a pike study that looked at exactly that question. So what they did is they had a spawning area for northern pike. They caught them during the spawn, released them, caught them multiple times sometimes, and they found they had no negative effect on the reproduction in that system.
Interesting.
They went, those fish, even though they got caught, they still, like, and you have to remember this, like, fish are programmed to do just a couple things. Like, they're not as complicated as some anglers want to make them out, right?
It's like Jaws, right?
They have one job in the spring is to make more muskies. And there's nothing that will stop them from doing that. And if there was, they wouldn't be around anymore. That's when extinction happens, right? And think about a salmon, right? If a salmon knew that a brown bear was going to be waiting at that waterfall, do you think it would go and try to jump it to go and spawn there? No, it wouldn't. They're programmed to do it. They have to go. And so when they get to these situations, there's very little that can disrupt them. Not only that, but, you know, in the course of our work as DNR, that's how we sample our muskie populations. We catch them during the spawning event. They're in a net for a period of time. Could be overnight, could be 12 hours, could be a little bit longer than that, depending on when they swim in the net. We then put them in a tub. Then we wrestle with them because they're green and really mad to get their length, to get their gender, to get aging structures, to get all the science that we need to properly manage them. And then we let them go. And in many of these situations, we do have natural reproduction in a lot of our lakes up north. It's not always enough to make it I'm going to put this in an interesting way. A current status fishable population. And what I mean by that is because our stocking has been really successful in the state of Wisconsin, our muskie populations tend to be higher than nature would ever make in most situations.
It makes sense.
So we've done a good job of providing these fisheries for folks, and folks are used to a certain level of success. So if we didn't stock any anymore, it's not like muskies would go away. We'd still have muskies in a lot of lakes in the state. The densities would just be much lower.
Yeah.
Because we're not artificially enhancing them through stocking. So when we're doing all this stuff, we're taking note. So then we also asked our hatchery system. We said, okay, our Governor Thompson hatchery in Spooner and our Art Emke in Woodruff, when are you guys stripping the eggs for our hatchery? And way over half the time, they were done before the 1st of May. They got all the eggs and the milk that they needed to, you know, grow muskies in our hatcheries before the first Saturday in May. So this is another positive, you know, to this potential change. We looked at all that stuff, right? It all just added up into a point where we said, you know what? These fish are programmed to do it. You know, people tell us, well, people will snag them. Well, snagging fish is illegal no matter what time it is. And you can't go snag muskies anytime. So if anyone's snagging muskies, they're already illegal. And that's not a real reason to not have a change.
True.
Right?
And then, okay. Yeah.
You got a question?
Well, because I thought in another one, just to kind of add to your list as we're kind of going through Escanaba and James River, I thought you had mentioned this, or maybe I saw somebody else mention, just kind of, to me, it was almost no-brainer. Our southern Wisconsin zone, you know, in Wisconsin, right? So that is the May 2nd opener. And did you guys look at, you know, populations there, you know, is another case study or?
Sure. Yep, we absolutely did. And really what all of this comes down to, Chaz, is that muskies don't get harvested. And there's been hundreds of research papers that show catch and release fishing for most species most of the time, and this is like a large majority, catch and release fishing is not detrimental to populations.
Interesting. Okay.
So like an example of a exception would be in Chesapeake Bay in the middle of the summer, they don't allow fishing for striped bass because they've found that under those conditions there, 100% of them die.
Okay.
When you catch them. So that would be a population level effect. When you're talking about muskies in the springtime, the water is cold, their chances of survival are much higher than they are almost
in
any other time
July
of year.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in all the, I don't know how many muskies I've handled at work, right? In netting and things, it's in the thousands, right? Like, I've not ever had one die during that situation. The only one I've ever had die had nothing to do with us handling it. It got in a net that we called, it was a little bit perchy, so the net was out of the water a little bit. We got a huge wind event that night, and it basically rolled this net and bashed the fish to death. It was a single fish in there.
Interesting.
And it was like a 30-incher. So that's the only one
very
that I've had
rare
die
over 20-some years. Yeah.
Very rare. So there's just all this evidence that points to the fact that, look, nobody's harvesting these things. The water's going to be cold. When they're actually in the act of spawning, they're literally not going to bite your bait.
Yes, and I mentioned that because you and I have both, since we were kids, we've all probably at some point in our lives casted at spawning muskies, and obviously nothing happens.
Right. They like, think about it. They're focused on procreation of their species. If they don't do it, their species goes away. Like, the only other thing they have to do is avoid being eaten until they're like 30 inches, and then they don't have anything to worry about.
And so, maybe, I don't know if this is the right time, Jordan, to ask this, because this is really interesting. It's what I think is interesting, again, folks, for listening, is the first thing that you mentioned is harvest. And then we went through these different case studies. We really just come back to, again, harvest, which is still negligible statewide, right? And
for sure.
And what's interesting, so I guess I'm just going to ask this, because this is kind of like, again, I just want to go back to, like, I'm thinking what I'm seeing on social media, and like this big fear within the muskie community. Again, or at least I see this keep playing out, is, hey, Jordan, what about this? So, okay, so now let's say we assume that harvest is very, very small, which it is. We can't even, it's not an assumption. So we know that as a fact, right?
Yep.
So harvest is tiny, but then people say, this is kind of that fear of muskie anglers, is like, well, okay, Jordan, what about that vulnerability during angling pressure? Does no matter what you're targeting them with, if you have 2D sonar or if you have 360 or live scope or whatever it is, does the DNR think that is going to negatively affect their spawning process, or are we just kind of saying, hey, because you've mentioned this, but I'm asking it again just to kind of reiterate this idea you stated, and I want to, that you said, hey, you can catch and release that fish, it's not going to hurt the spawning process, which is, again, this is kind of like this big fear, and so you're saying no, really, from your data and everything that you've done in your netting and so this is not really as big of an impact as we think it is. Is that true? Yeah,
and I don't want to discount people's concerns, because I honestly know that they would just care about the species, right?
Yes, yes.
I hope it's not, and I do think that this plays in some of it. I don't think they trust us as department staff, and I guess I would say to that, I have no personal reason. What do I gain if I do something that would destroy the only fish I want to fish for?
Yeah.
I would never do that. And I don't gain anything by any of these changes. So, like, if I was making money somehow by making these changes, I could see that criticism, right? But, for me, if folks know me and they've dealt with me long enough, they know that integrity is the number one thing that I work on. Without that, I don't have anywhere to sit. So my whole career has been to ensure that the integrity of the things that I say and do are backed up by data.
So just
when we talk about
this
whole situation, a number of years ago, I talked about the way we make rules. I forgot to mention the fact that sometimes we get told what we have to do. And back in the day, we got told that we must institute a statewide catch and release bass season. Basically, we were told that by our legislature. And so we made those rules because that's what we do. But it also plays into this particular situation because, believe it or not, there's people out there that are already fishing for muskies in the spring, just
saying they're bass fishing. Yeah.
Right. So it's when you talk about the law enforcement aspect of this, which we'll go back a little bit here to talk about if anyone ever sees anyone that looks like they're snagging muskies, your first thing should do, because all y'all got phones, you better be calling the tip line. Otherwise, don't whine about it.
That's a really
Right?
good point. That is a really good point just to throw out there. Yeah.
Because snagging any fish is illegal. You're not allowed to do that. So if anyone sees it, I mean, we're really good police of ourselves. We're probably, as muskie anglers, we're the meanest group of folks I know.
Yes.
We're meaner than trout anglers.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we'll eat our own young for sure. And so, make sure you see that. If you see it, call. I mean, I know some people get frustrated with the response times or whatever, but if you don't do anything, you're just allowing it to persist. So you need to do something to stop it. So that's always been illegal. And I forgot where I was going.
Well, but you were kind of saying, but it's actually really interesting because this would be a guy like myself fishing, let's say, a big northern Wisconsin flowage with muskies in it, and I'm fishing for catch and release smallies, right? Mm-hmm. And who's to say, right? So this gets into this weird gray area, this muddled area where I'm throwing, let's say, a J13 Rapala, and I'm, who's to say I'm not targeting? There are people, you kind of said, there are people that are already targeting muskies under the guise of bass anglers. But what's the difference between people targeting bass that are going to catch incidental muskies, and you're kind of have this same thing going on, and nobody's killing them anyway. Nobody's like. So I guess the question is then, I mean, I don't know, this is just leading me to this question. Does this May 2nd muskie opener in northern Wisconsin, do you feel that this is going to bring droves of people up to all of a sudden start fishing muskies earlier than usual, or is that just kind of like this hysteria thinking that's probably not realistic?
Well, I know that was one of the things that the original author of that citizen resolution put in there. Part of the goal that he stated was to increase tourism in northern Wisconsin. And that part of it is not really something that a fisheries professional does, right? I'm an expert at fisheries management. I'm not an expert at economy. So I would never presume to, put anything into this process that had to do with that, because that was not part of our analysis.
Okay.
Will it? I don't know. If you look at, some folks' response online, I don't know, maybe it might be 50-50 whether people even, agree to fish this period of time. So it may not, but that's not really part of our thought process when we go into these rules. It's not a major part for sure.
So you're kind of saying, just like, okay, as you dig into the data of the unified season research, yeah, the science we're saying that long-term population dynamics in jurisdictions where there has been a unified season, that there's no correlation necessarily with early season pressure and adult mortality. Because we're talking about like harvest, right? Or even we could say mortality. Really, there's not strong evidence to suggest that like early season pressure is associated with adult mortality or like loss of year class strength and things like that.
Right. Because when you think about other places that have either year-round seasons or no close season, like Michigan, catch and release year-round. It's only been for, I don't know, I think about 5 years. I'm not 100% sure. I talked to my colleagues over there. I called them, ones that specifically manage like good musky waters, talking to, Lake St. Clair waters, inland waters. Mm-hmm. They cannot see anything in their data that suggests it's a negative at this point. Now, that doesn't mean that in the next 10 years, it doesn't change. So that's the other part of this, right? This isn't something that a rule changed, right? And it's going to be that way into perpetuity. Like, our job as fisheries scientists is to monitor this stuff. So we will, if we notice that this, whatever mechanism happens, and if it were a detriment to populations, we would change it. It's not something that
now that
stays forever.
You literally, Jordan, guys, folks listening, Jordan does not know the questions I'm asking him. You kind of knew the idea, but like you're reading my questions, because that was my next thing, was like the future and trophy potential in Wisconsin. Because like folks who want to ask, that's the anxiety in me, says, hey, what is the DNR going to do? And I guess that's my question that's kind of interesting. I know we've been going here for a while, but this is fascinating to me. How long of a time period, I don't even know if that's a question you can answer, But would if from a scientific perspective, when would you start seeing like, hey, okay, now we have, open harvest May 2nd, and, do we go 5 years, or how long does that take place before you say, okay, this is having a detrimental effect, we're going to, now push this back to the third weekend or the last weekend in May? How long does that take, or is there any data to suggest when changes have been made in the past, like how long those? I mean, obviously from 1984 till now, I mean, some of these things take a long time. Yeah,
right. And that at the time in 1984, they didn't talk about this change as part of a study where they would look at it. They just said we're doing this for this reason, and that's that, right? We have said that in our narrative and in our communications with Natural Resource Board and folks. We did say we will monitor harvest. Like I said, right, we're going back to harvest again because harvest is the number one thing, right? It's
dead muskie is a dead muskie. We don't like to think about it, but it's true. Yeah.
So, for example, if because of this or any other reason, harvest increases, say we're now killing 1,000 fish a year, that will be concerning, right? Maybe not on a statewide level, but certainly potentially to individual water bodies, right? So the other part of this, to answer your question, is that the length of time that you kind of have to wait to see if something's going to work has a lot to do with the length of time the fish species survives. So, for example, an extreme one would be lake sturgeon, right? They live 100 years. So you can't tell anything in 5. 5 years doesn't tell you anything, right? Because they live 100 years. With muskies, they generally live about 30 years-ish, maybe 35 at the top end, and probably not in Wisconsin, 35. Maybe in some Canadian Shield lakes they could get 35. So you have to take that into account. Ideally, 10 years for sure, you should be able to see something, but you might get some indications after 5. So we're going to continue monitoring, the whole time. We're not going to stop looking at these things. This is going to be questions that we look to, kind of keep track of every single year. But, it should be pretty obvious.
Yeah,
we can't say
that's really interesting. And I guess, and you'd be the guy to ask about this. Does the state have are there any proposed, or are there any maybe something, I don't know if you can tell us, but are there any proposed ideas about changing stocking, or is it just hey, harvest is not anticipated to go up. We're not going to really, there are no future ideas about changing stocking efforts or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the stocking issue is kind of a separate issue.
Okay.
In Wisconsin right now. Sure. People want to put them together, and I understand why they would want to put them together. But our stocking issues are budget related. Okay. And the budget issue is fishing license price related. So that's a whole nother can of worms. If you want to go into that, we can. It's not really pertinent to this discussion.
No, we could save that for another date.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
But there's talking about other places that have rules with opens. We looked all over. The only other places that have closed seasons are obviously Ontario, that you know about, Minnesota, yes, and I want to say New York and Wisconsin. Those are the list. Everywhere else has basically continuous open seasons. Iowa has Okoboji. There's let's see, how is it? Okoboji,
yeah, and that's delayed.
Has a little bit of a closed season, but it's not a very long, not very long. But there's so many other places in the Musky Range or the modern day Musky Range that have open seasons with no detriment to their populations. Think about Cape Run. I mean, there's got to be some NR going on there because they don't stock enough fish to produce the number of fish that thing produces.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, absolutely. Natural reproduction's for sure taking place.
There has to be some somewhere. And I mean, I don't know that much about the lake other than people catch the crap out of fish there. They get big there, and they don't stock that many fish there.
So, I mean, to me, this kind of comes back to this, I mean, in a way, just to kind of round this whole thing out, as we kind of take, I don't know, to me, I'm kind of going full circle now. I'm saying, okay, Jordan, to me, this comes down to harvest and then making sure that, okay, so now we have, this early season for I call it an early season, but to me it's like, okay, now it's up to us anglers to we can have fun, we can target these muskies during this time, but we have to be even doing a better job with delayed mortality and doing, because people are going to probably be fishing for the first time in a long time suckers in May, right? And that's going to be a change. I mean it will be kind of odd to see people floating suckers on opening weekend for muskies, and right. So to me it kind of becomes even more important for even guys like myself, or guys like yourself, anybody with a YouTube channel, anybody in the realm of muskellunge education, to say, okay, look, now we need to even be more careful with people that are new to the sport, teaching them how to do this properly. Is where I'm.
Yeah, I mean that's always true though, right? Just in the spring, that's always
you're correct
for us to do that.
Always true.
The bonus, the benefit we have in the springtime is, man, when the water's cold, those things will whoop you.
Easy release. Yeah.
They generally do really well. I mean, you're probably not going to see water over maybe 65. And man, those things, they do so good in that cold water. So that part of it, and when you talk about sucker fishing, we had a rule that went into place in 2012 that basically took 80% mortality on sucker caught fish and turned it into much less than that.
Yes.
By changing over to mandatory quick strike rigs and whatnot. So and there's all those things that we should be aware of, and we should teach folks that don't know as much as us, and maybe folks who are just starting out, or people that want to try something new. We do a really good job as a community for the most part, for new folks, and teaching them the proper tools to have. And I mean, you do a great job of this, talking about that stuff. And so we just need to keep doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I fully support anybody who doesn't agree with this. Just don't fish. Like, that's the beauty of this. I mean, free country, right? You do what you feel is right, and if you don't feel it's right, you shouldn't do it.
Well, and like you said too, I think what's really, I do think that, like, policing ourselves. If you see somebody doing something dumb, because there's a lot of talk, and I'm not going to act like I'm not somebody who has thought about, are people going to be using some of our different now sonar technologies to go target fish that they shouldn't be. But it's like, hey, like you stated very early on in this conversation, doing something illegal is just plain doing something illegal. Like, you shouldn't be doing that anyway. So
and generally there aren't a huge number of people that are, doing that. There are people that, do have bad intentions, and no matter what the rules are, those bad intentions are probably going to come out. But thankfully, that's generally a very small number of people.
And I guess last thing here, because I know we've been on a little over an hour, and again, we so appreciate your time, Jordan, on musky therapy and everywhere you've spoke. But here's something that I wanted to ask, and I have to ask this before we leave. Maybe because we talked a little bit about catch and release bass fishing, and even you talked about pike, targeting pike during their spawn, and that was probably a peer-reviewed study that was published. Is there any danger within this idea of, like, to me, I always, because you're absolutely right, our smallmouth bass fisheries in northern Wisconsin, in my humble opinion, are absolutely out of this world fantastic. We have some of the best smallmouth bass fishing in the country. And obviously a lot of these fish, tons of them are caught pre-spawn or while they're on their beds. I mean, and these fish do just fine. The populations are off the charts, right? And very few people are even harvesting. At least from what I see, a lot of people are not harvesting smallmouth or largemouth, at least not to maybe the extent they used to. I don't know on that data.
Right.
But I guess my point being, is there anything that we should be concerned about with regard to, let's say, more people are catching muskies during that spawning period? And I guess to me, the smaller, like a smallmouth bass, their ability to recuperate and go back to that spawning, because you mentioned this, right? Like, the fish has got one thing on its, if we can call it a brain, or, obviously it's got a brain, but they're going to go reproduce. And with muskies, is there a fear that if you catch a big, let's say a high 40s or, a larger fish, will it take them? Is there any concern that this takes them a period of time after a long fight? And let's say folks do a good job on hooking it, but You know where I'm going with this. Like, is that
Yep.
is that anything that we should be worried about? Like that fish going back to reproduce? Because a lot of folks will say, hey, once you catch that fish, it is going to screw up. It's not going to be with its spawning pair, or it's. Is that a legit like fear, or is that just like non-science folks thinking up things that may not be happening?
Well, first thing, and this is paramount, right? Like, there has not been a study to look specifically at that.
Okay.
Right. So from a peer-reviewed study perspective, I can't answer it that way. What I can say, and I'm always very careful to do it this way, is in my professional opinion, it's not going to have a negative impact. So I'll go back to those fish that we net every spring, right?
Okay.
I have heard folks go, well, what if you pick up a big muskie and she's dropping eggs in your boat? Those eggs can't, survive.
Sure.
100% they can't. Yeah, eggs on your boat deck, not going to hatch. But that doesn't mean that fish isn't going to be successful spawning. Muskies are much different than smallmouth bass in a couple respects. Muskie are a fractional spawner, and they do not create a bed, right? They swim along the shore.
Yes.
They deposit their eggs over, it could be 40 yards, it could be 400 yards, it could be quite a distance along the shoreline. And bass, they create a nest which they defend. And so when you think about a bass that sits on a nest, usually it takes, depending on water temperatures, 7 to 14 days for eggs to hatch. So if a bass, the males will make the bed, females show up, drop the eggs, male protects the eggs. Now we're talking bass. They hatch after 2 weeks. So now the fish has been on this bed defending it for 2 weeks from crayfish and rock bass and perch and bluegill and Chaz Martin and Jordan Weeks and everybody else that's out there fishing for 2 weeks. Yet those adults can be found on the same bed, 10 years consecutive, because they have extreme sight fidelity. And this has been shown by research. Like, those male bass will build the nest in the same spot their whole life. So muskies are much different. The males tend to hang out shallow, waiting for the girls to show up. The girls know when they're ready. And whatever situation they're in, if it's water temperature or moon or day length or whatever it is, they're predisposed to go and do their thing. So they will come into the spawning area. A male or multiple males will find them because there's pheromones in the water and things like that. And they will do their thing. If we catch them before that, it most likely will delay when they get in there, but they're still going in there. So if it takes them an hour to recover from an angling experience, after that hour, I fully expect them to go in and do their thing. Just like I said with the salmon. Like, the salmon try to jump those waterfalls, and they don't always make it the first time, but they keep trying until they make it. This wouldn't be something we would do flippantly, and we a lot went into it. And I understand why people are upset. I get it. You're never going to make everybody happy. What I hope that comes from, this podcast, or anyone who's listening to this, please, pretty please, with sugar on top, if you have a question, call and ask or email me. I promise anybody who's done that, they may not have liked my response, but they got a response.
And Jordan, just for folks that are listening, what is your email? If people had questions and they wanted to, obviously it's easy to find it online, but
it's my first name dot my last name at wisconsin.gov. So my first name is spelled JORDAN .WEEKS at wisconsin.gov.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, I just, you're like, are you there, Chaz? I'm like, yeah, my mind is, I think we covered so many miles here tonight. And, even as a high school science teacher, I'm sitting here trying to piece these things together. And it's absolutely fascinating. I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule with your family and your work, obviously. It's not, you have 2 full-time jobs. For taking some time here tonight, talking about something that's obviously, very important to us in the muskie community and just shedding some light on a lot of these scientific processes that are difficult to explain to folks just in general. I mean, I think there's a lot of this research stuff that's sometimes difficult to understand, but at the end of the day, I mean, I've definitely learned so much here with you tonight. So thank you very much for coming on Musky Therapy.
Yeah, I'm always interested in doing this stuff because a big part of our job is information dissemination. And, if more people understand why we're doing what we're doing, it'll be a much better situation for everybody. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat with you, and I'm more than happy to do it at any time.
Absolutely. And that's one of my hopes, is that folks listening, if there are questions for Jordan, obviously we can field some of those in comments and this and that, but maybe this will spawn, no pun intended, another podcast in the future, maybe with some questions in this as we make our way toward May 2nd. So
yeah, sure thing, man.
Awesome. Well, everybody, again, we really hope you enjoyed this very special and exciting edition of the Musky Therapy Podcast. Special thanks again to Jordan Weeks. So everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. We'll see you next time.